Welcome and thank you for clicking in to join us to hear our wonderful local authors presenting for us. My name is Phyllis Bobrow. I'm representing the Community Sisterhood of Temple Beth Israel. Our TBI community is blessed with extraordinarily talented people who thankfully are equally as generous with their gifts. This afternoon, 5 of our accomplished local authors will share readings of their works. First up will be Bill Sarnoff. Bill has been a member of TBI for 31 years. He writes life stories with touches of humor. His reading today is called Navigating the Seas and is one of 162 stories recently published in 3 separate volumes, all of which are available on Amazon. Bill?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, shall I start?
Please.
Good. Okay. A very, very short story, about 3.5 minutes, about a recent widow, about early 60s, who belongs to a girls' group. It could be a book club, a garden club, whatever. And she has decided for the first time in her life that she is going to go on a cruise. And so her friends have gathered together on a Saturday night with giving her a bon voyage party. And she promised, because this is her very first time on a cruise, that she would take her laptop and she would send a brief report every day on this very first cruise in her life. Starting number 1, Sunday, November the 18th. This is her email to her friends. And she writes, "Thank you all for the surprise bon voyage party yesterday. It's been a challenging 2 years since Martin's passing, but here I am in Fort Lauderdale waiting to board my ship for a Caribbean cruise." Excuse me, my first cruise ever. As you suggested, I did drop in at Lilac and Lily's, the trendy boutique shop on Sunrise Boulevard, and really splurged. Bought a daring 2-piece swimsuit with matching beach towel, robe and carry-all bag. Even found a color-coordinated pair of poolside slippers. First time alone on a trip since our honeymoon 30 years ago. As Cindy commented at one of our many toasts, life is about moments. Don't wait for them, create them. Monday, November 19th. I'm not going to let Martin's illness and passing cause me to be a recluse any longer. I'm going to fluff up my tutu, unwrap my dancing shoes, and dance away to a live shipboard orchestra. Yippee! Spent the entire day on the open day at poolside. Thank you, Corinne, for coercing me to join your Pilates class. I feel more confident having my figure back, and with lotions at the ready, am also eager to gather up some sun. Met the navigator of this giant ship on a passenger tour through the pilot house and navigation desk. He seemed like a really nice person and very confident about guiding this giant vessel. An almost modern day version of Clint Eastwood, except taller and darker eyes. There was sinew and a casual audacity about him, and I thought him quite attractive. Tuesday, November 20th. We're heading to Cozumel. Weather is magnificent. Played shuffleboard at poolside. Lunch on an outdoor Lido deck with 3 roaming violinists performing Imperfect Union. Playing Hungarian and Old World classics. Sweet. Ship's navigator strolled by, said hello again, and joined me for an exotic and sweet herbal tea. His name is Oliverio Geo Tenerelli. Too attractive, I think, to be cooped up all day with his blinking GPS monitors, steering wheels, and compasses. No sign anywhere of a helm's wheel, not even a miniature one. Wednesday, November 21. Had my hair done, massage, facial, the whole works in the ship's elegant salon. Really spendy, but their staff of Indonesian stylists are truly superb. I like my new look. Spent all afternoon in the casino, and luck was with me. Won $600. Oliverio happened to pass through and invited me to join him at his table for dinner. He is quite attractive in his crisp uniform, and I am comfortable with his easy smile and manners. A far cry from Martin's ongoing criticalness of the world. He called me Canarino all through dinner, which he told me means canary in Italian. I had a wonderful time, and he invited me to spend the night in his cabin when he came off duty. I declined. What would my children think? Thursday, November 22. We're on our way for the ship's destination to Half Moon Cay, a private island owned and staffed by our cruise line. An impressive barbecue spread, never-ending supply of rum and cokes, Cayman Island singers and musicians, and Oliverio. Had several drinks together, spent the balance of the day strolling the beach hand in hand. He stopped abruptly and told me he was madly in love with me. Had to have me, he said over and over. He insisted I join him in his suite on board and got very emotional, saying if I refused, he would run the ship onto the shoals with all 3,200 passengers. I was shocked. It was a dilemma I had never faced before in my life. Friday, November 23. Last night I saved 3,200 lives. Twice. Thank you.
Bill, thank you so much.
That's my story.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Our next speaker will be Sabina Stark. Sabina is a New York-born writer and daughter of immigrants who received the Oregon Literary Arts Fellowship for her book In Progress. Her prose and poetry appear in a number of literary journals. Her poem High Holy Days is included in the anthology Before There Is Nowhere to Stand. A longtime musician and composer, her song Learning How to Fly was recorded by Tuck and Patty and is performed around the world. Sabina?
Thank you. Thank you, Phyllis, for asking me to read today. I've got 2 short pieces, and Bill, that was wonderful. I guess we're sick of the cold weather already because I'm reading two pieces about the sea also and warmer climes.
Good.
This first short piece is called Beach Day, and it's a scene out of my memoir In Progress. My mother walked us to the subway entrance. She gave my big sister Susie a rolled up bath towel, and a bag that was filled with sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, and a package of Hostess cupcakes. She put only 2 tokens in Susie's hand, one for going there and one for coming home. I could slip under the turnstile. I was almost 4 years old. Susie was 9. It was a work day for my mother, but it was summer and we were both out of school. When we got into our seats on the subway, the bathing suit tie behind my neck got caught in my ponytail. Susie had to pull out a few hairs to get it loose, and we were both yelling before she could untie and retie it. At the Coney Island stop, the underground air was cooler and smellier than at the train station at home. Susie held me by the wrist and pushed us both through the crowd. We rode the escalator, and when we got to the boardwalk, the breeze tasted like salt and fish with little wafts of pea. "The beach!" I yelled, and I broke free and ran into the sand and into the sea of people and beach towels and colored umbrellas and babies and radios and beach balls and fallen hot dog buns. And I was laughing, and Susie chased me between men with hairy legs and cigarettes and boys digging sand, and she yelled my name, and I dashed and I slipped between women who smelled like suntan lotion and girls pouring seawater out of pails over sand mats and soda cans and sticky ice cream wrappers, and I ran, and Susie came after me in front of ladies in bathing suits with big breasts and no breasts and sunglasses, and between families eating on chairs and swimmers returning, dripping water down their legs, and I was still running and laughing, the beach, and I couldn't stop, and radios were playing, and Susie screamed across the noisy strand at me and sprinted after me between so many colorful bodies. And when she caught up with me, she grabbed one of my thin arms and I cried, and she walked us to a spot on the sand between teenagers and yellow and blue plastic buckets and glass bottles and a pink ball and paper cones and white bathing caps. And she unrolled our towel and we sat down. And I was afraid of the monstrous gray-blue ocean. But Susie lifted me and hugged me to her chest and walked us both toward the cool waves. And I screamed and I hit her once on the head, and she held on to me, and she walked in deeper, and my legs tightened around her waist as the water rose. And I shrieked, "No, I don't want to." And I tried to break free, but she held me and stood in the water until the salty gray waves splashed us up to my belly. And she ducked down without warning, and my head was drenched. And for one gasping moment, I thought we would die in that terrible place. And I hated the beach, and I could see through the dirty water, and the salt tasted bad and burned my eyes. "See, it's okay," she said, and dipped us down again. And I was stunned, and I sputtered and cried, and she stood in the water just looking until I stopped crying. And she walked us back, both of us soaking wet, to the shore. And we returned to our towel, and I sat down in my own puddle of water, staring at the hideous gray-blue waves, my feet caked with grains of sand. And we ate lunch, and the sandwiches were hot, and my cupcake fell, and Susie broke off the dirty part and gave me the rest. And later she took us to the bathroom where we showered across from 2 naked women in a room with no curtains, and the cement floor was gritty, and someone left a bathing suit on the floor in a pile of sand, and everyone walked around it. And on the subway home, my bathing suit straps were hanging untied on my back. And by the end of the ride, Susie's eyes looked red, and my face and neck and shoulders and the tops of my arms were burning. And Susie pulled us through the crowd at the Delancey Street stop, and we took the escalator up to the street. And when we came back to our apartment, all the windows were propped open, and the table fan was spinning, and we could smell chicken and onions simmering on the stove. And my mother was taking a bath, and we could hear her singing a wordless song through the open bathroom window. And I yelled to my mother, "Susie took us swimming! Susie took us swimming at the beach!" So I have,
Magnificent. Magnificent, Sabina.
thank you.
Magnificent.
I have one more. This is an oldie. For about 2.5 years, I was in a writing group called the Jewish Lesbian Writers Group, and we did readings all over the Bay Area, and it was always synced in with Jewish holidays. And the Passover reading, I wrote the introduction, and it was called Yenta Surfer Dikes at the Reed Sea. And I updated it just a little bit. The water was just right, the air pleasantly warm, and Pharaoh's army nowhere in sight. We were wading, waves splashing against our ankles, our toes digging into the sand, when the sound of horses rumbled behind us. "You've got to be kidding," I said to Sadie. I looked back to catch a distant glint of metal. Sadie hollered across the beach, "Quick, Helen, grab your board. We're riding out of here." Ruthie had already paddled in. Luckily, we had all just waxed up. We belly boarded out past where the waves were breaking. Ruthie's board was the slickest and she skimmed ahead. Also, she was the least afraid of sharks. When I caught up to her, I could hear those army bastards getting closer. The water was getting colder and I could feel it biting at my legs. We rode through and over every swell, but we were losing ground because the wayward tide was both pushing and pulling on us. Then it hit, the biggest reverse wave you ever saw. I mean, really big. We were on it before any of us could figure out what happened. Our feet stuck to those boards like cream cheese on sponge cake. The four of us were flying over the top of that churning water, and then the whole sea split apart. I tried to cut back, but my arms went noodly. I thought I was having a heart attack. We rode that crazy backward wave farther and farther into the sea until the crest gave way and flung us onto the far edge of the sand. Ruthie landed hard, grabbed the board before it floated back out, and crawled onto the new shore. "Is this Canaan?" she yelled. But then, out of nowhere, on a path between walls of salty foam, those Egyptians came racing toward us. There were snorting horses and clanging shields and whooping men wearing little red pharaoh hats emblazoned with "Make Ramses Great Again." It was the 11th plague. Sadie and Helen both screamed. We all started to run, but before we could look behind us, that wave started to erupt again, and with a deafening groan, took the whole army back out into the middle of the water, every damn one of them. We were stunned silent, all except Ruthie, who stood with us looking out over the calming water. "Thank God," she said.
Yay, Sabina. Thank you so much.
Delicious.
That was great.
Yay!
Thank you.
So our next speaker, reader, author is Sharon Laskmunson. Sharon grew up in Detroit, Michigan. She taught school in England, Germany, Okinawa, and Puerto Rico before driving her blue Oldsmobile to Anchorage, Alaska, where she taught, married, and stayed for the next 20 years. Sharon is the author of 2 chapbooks, Stillness Settles Down the Lane and Braiding Lives. She's a finalist in the Poetica Publishing Chapbook Contest. She has 2 full-length books, That Certain Blue and The Weight of Snow, both published by Blue Light Press. Sharon says many things motivate her to write: a mood, a memory, the smell of cooking, burning leaves, a windy day, rain, fog, something observed or overheard, and of course, imagination. Sharon?
What a pleasure. Thank you, Phyllis. And it's lovely to read with everyone. My first poem is an answer to a question I asked my mother many, many, many years ago. In answer to a question. The butcher Eiselman, he placed a finger on the scale, his index finger, and turned in such a way I shouldn't see. And he pushed, and I saw. And I went home, weighed the brisket, a true accounting. And I said to your father, Leon, would you mind if I shopped at A&P? It would be better. So instead of walking 2 short blocks to Eiselman's, I drove the gray DeSoto to the market on Dexter. And in answer to your question, my darling daughter, that is when I gave up kosher. The next poem, I actually had to call my sister and say, did this really happen? Table manners. Aunt Rose served baked ham for dinner. Unfamiliar pink meat topped with pineapple and brown sugar. We sit in the silent dinette, eyes downcast, picking at the blue damask cloth on our laps. My father's face is turned, mother's lips pursed. I listen for the roar from above, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, God of sliced brisket and pickled whitefish, God of stuffed kishka and noodle kugel, God of Sunday morning brunches, creamed herring, cheese blintzes, dairy dinners. I move pieces of ham around my plate like knights on a chessboard, slip them under mashed potatoes, wondering if God, like me, plays at being polite. When my mother was 89, I brought her to Oregon and she lived out her life here 6 years. And this next poem came out of a conversation we had. Unbound, but for the Sabbath shawl. On Mother's 90th birthday, I suggest she do away with a lifetime of support undergarments. Straps that pinch, rub, hinder, leave painful grooves on shoulder, waist, and thigh. I encourage her to get rid of bras, girdles, garter belts, hose, shed all metal and underwire. I reason that at a certain age, it's time to give up cramped and constricted. She no longer needed to fasten, snap, squeeze, jam, push up. No button short of the hole. No hook to catch or snag. Oh my, she replied, and with an open mind, shrugged away a lifetime of tight and dense for soft, breathable, pure Pima cotton undershirts, downy anklets, silky undies, leaving her supple, unbound, and free.
Beautiful.
A great
That was
trio.
wonderful.
Okay, but my mother was here. I took her to the Temple senior lunches, and it was a joy for her. It was a lovely outing. And one little something that was said that I overheard turned into a poem entitled Kugel. They sit in the residence lounge discussing the trip earlier that day to a senior luncheon. They had been served chopped liver, roast brisket, kugel, and an apple raisin strudel for dessert. The entertainment, a discussion on the life and writings of Philip Roth. But it is the beloved kugel claiming the late afternoon conversation. No two kugels are cut from the same dough. In the days Leah kept house, her kugel was made with broad noodles, eggs, golden raisins, brown sugar, farmer's cheese, walnuts, and a hint of cinnamon. Esther preferred medium noodles, cream cheese, dark raisins, 2 generous cups of chopped green apples. Dinah relied on her own mother's recipe brought before the war from Poland. Noodles any size, but what set the dish apart? Dry cottage cheese, black prunes, and the cookie cum topping her children loved. Mona modernized, cut calories. Yogurt instead of sour cream, halved the number of eggs, added dry apricots and what other fruit she had stored in the pantry. Sophie shied away from sweet puddings. Her husband, may his memory be for a blessing, favored savory sides. She made vegetable kugels, spinach or potatoes as the main ingredient. As the winter day darkened, Rose divulged she was partial to small curd cottage cheese, added 2 hard cheeses, Swiss, and a liberal shower of Parmesan. At 5 o'clock sharp, the dinner bell was heard, and the ladies quickly marched into the dining room with very good appetites indeed.
Great.
You've just
Great.
increased my appetite.
Well, this one might too. It's really funny. When I gathered Jewish-themed poems to read, I thought, oh my gosh, most of them talk about food, but it's true.
Yep.
It took me back to being a kid, Sharon. Thank you.
Checklist. Mostly she talks, I listen. Her voice, the music of my childhood. The pitch, the cadence, all Aunt Jenny. We talk of Molly's temper, Harold's triumphs, Norman's business failures. And whatever happened to Cousin Mildred's daughter, the middle one who went to Stanford and showed such promise? She tells me to buy canned tuna and olive oil at Trader Joe's. She tells me to stop spreading with schmaltz, it will kill me. At 90, she's a regular Fanny Bryce. After I'm dead, she tells me, Sheldon will pass the bar. Ruthie will meet someone and remarry. Call and let me know. And the next poem I picked, I chose it just because I had so much fun writing it. And I like reading it. And it came out of, I bought a container of pickup sticks for a child, and it was The Shape. And this is called Along the Same Lines. Step on a crack, break your mother's back. Old children's game. And Carol, Sue, and Bonnie are here, and they'll remember this. We took the superstition seriously, walked with friends down Burlingame Street, skipped over lines. At school, we lined up for lunch, water fountain, pencil sharpener. We scurried to be head of the line. Gym lines were a challenge. Relays to run, bars to jump, ropes to climb, lines of scrimmage, finishing lines. We wrote on lined paper, discussed storylines, studied plus and minus signs. We sat in desks all aligned, stayed within margins as we underlined, outlined, colored within or outside the lines. Bad grades meant borderlines. Teachers took a tough line. Times change. We no longer use clotheslines, talk on party lines, or wear hosiery, the seamed kind. Now we have wrinkle lines, laugh lines, crow's feet, mouths set in angry lines. We line up for movies, park cars within parallel lines, jog the path, run the track, line our pockets, question a person's line of work, their bloodlines. We fight wars on front lines, hold defense lines, remember the Maginot Line. When drowning, we grab lifelines. Consider span of lines, lives, scribble verse in lines. We blur lines between news and entertainment, depend on cable lines. Organizations expect us to follow rules, behave accordingly, fall into line. The internet gives us invisible, worldwide wireless lines. We live our lives, and when times get hard, we lay it all out on the line. Two poems left. This next one, I just loved family gatherings, all the generations, the talk, the conversation, the food. And I entitled this, The Whole Mishbucha. Crumbs of cake disappear. Cups of sweet lemon tea empty. We sit around the dining table discussing lineage, Pale of Settlement, Poland, Romania, generations, first cousins, second cousins, third cousins once removed, Tante Bela, Uncle Eli, Great Grandpa Herschel, trying to work out family history, how we're all related and how far back. I tell them, my dad solved this time-honored dialogue by declaring, my father and his father were grandfathers. Harold bursts out laughing. Bessie chuckles, diffusing the discussion. Family members push back their chairs and hug goodnight. And my last poem is from my last visit to Detroit. Visit. Red maple leaves fall on your graves. Reaching into my pocket, I leave 2 small stones from my garden to let you know I've been here. Final note. All the questions I never asked. Thank you.
Oh, Sharon, thank you. It was lovely.
Beautiful writing, Sharon.
Thank you, Bill.
Beautiful.
Well, thank you.
Our next presenter will be Shevach Lambert. Shevach has been a member of TBI for over 40 years and has been known to present Devar Torah on a variety of topics. Today's offering is part of a much longer story that is still a work in progress. He says, sometimes it seems more work than progress. Like most of his fiction, it attempts to poke gentle fun at some of our more human foibles. Shevach?
Thank you, Phyllis. Thank you, everyone who's read so far. It's been a real joy and inspiration to listen to. This is, for our purposes, called The Story of Jonas.
Wait, you just went mute. Shevach?
Jonas's name was Jonas. Okay.
Yeah, go. I think you're okay now.
Okay. Jonas's name was Jonas, but that wasn't his fault. The real blame for his name lay with the confused piety of his mother, who was so enthralled with her firstborn son that she was determined to give him a name of sufficient biblical caliber as to command the Lord's immediate respect, or at least that of the Long Island synagogue, over whose sisterhood she held imperial sway. The fact that her acquaintance with the Bible was based mainly on hearsay did not deter her, as she was assumed that Scripture would sanction her choice as simply a courtesy extended from one higher power to another. Joan Greenberg agonized over that choice. She wanted a name resonant with tradition, yet immune to degradation by nickname. Neither she nor she assumed the divine would tolerate trivialization. She toyed with Samuel, but that could be demoted to Sam, or worse, Sammy, which suggested something shifty and prone to gambling. She thought of Jacob, but the slippery slope from Jacob to Jake the jerk left her slightly queasy. She even considered Isaac after her own father, a possibility thankfully squelched by the namesake himself, who called up from Florida to complain, "You're supposed to wait till I'm dead. You're trying to tell me something." In desperation, Joan even consulted her husband, the baby's father. This was an obsessive-compulsive accounting firm executive named Morton, who brought on an early frost when it was a joke, Morton insisted from outside the bedroom door, although he thought you had to admit it had some merit. While the name deductible may not have made it into the biblical canon yet, it at least made the most of the baby's rather limited contribution to the family finances, came up with a name worthy of their owner. If social convention wouldn't permit a man the purity of a name like Joan, he could without shame live as Jonah. Jonah seemed more or less secure against the blight of nickname. It sounded strong enough to withstand the lazy-tongued deconstruction of Jonah into Joan, which of course, Joan insisted, wasn't the idea at all. And any irregular maternal bond suggested by shared nomenclature was purely phonetic. That was all, and nothing for anyone to pay attention to ever. So those people attracted to sinister innuendos could just stop right there. After all, as Joan archly reminded the congregation, was it not Jonah who had succeeded where Moses himself had failed? Had the walls of Jericho, conquered the land, and divvied it up? Didn't he get a book in the Bible named after him? Jonah was something. No one would mess with Jonah. The congregation received this revelation with the same silent respect accorded all of its shrill, high-strung, emotionally fragile financial pillars, and the pleasant fiction was maintained right up until the day of the circumcision. It was only after the priests had inscribed the name into flesh and covenant that a smart, articulate, knowledgeable young assistant rabbi told her she wanted Joshua. Jonah, the smart, articulate, knowledgeable young rabbi stammered on, in a desperate attempt to thaw the frozen shock his degree in biblical literacy had created, was one heck of a swell name too. But the cockamamie tale connected to this clown seemed more of a sick cosmic joke than a biblical epic. From the hero of Jericho, her sweet baby had metamorphed into some crank who squabbled with God, played hooky on a ship, was chucked overboard, and caught by a fish, which threw him back. Whereupon he'd gone off to some city to gloom and doom the inhabitants into a disagreeable display of repentance, and having succeeded, retired into a monumental sulk for no apparent reason. There was more unpleasantness involving worms and gourds, but by then Joan had stopped listening as a smart, articulate, knowledgeable young rabbi deconstructed her rosy reality and left her with a horrific realization that she'd named her son after whale vomit. Mortified, folded her tents and stole off into a dark night of the soul. The congregation tried hard to make amends. The smart-ass, loudmouth, know-it-all kid rabbi was exiled off to a Jersey day school, and the book of Jonah was chanted with a kind of partisan fervor on the next day of atonement, whose liturgy was creatively expanded to beg forgiveness for the sin of speaking truth to power. The damage inflicted by the deity's sense of humor, however, proved irreversible. Joan eventually emerged from a glowering brood to announce that her son Jonah would henceforth be known as Jonas. The substitution, while suspiciously Gallic, seemed at least theologically neutral. Only when she belatedly realized that this revision would inevitably degenerate into Jones' ass, a possibility her overwrought mental filters had initially sugared out, did she resign from the synagogue and flee into exile, as Massachusetts was then known. So Jonas became Jonas, but somehow his mother's artful dodge couldn't quite dispel the cloud that had accompanied his birth. He grew up feeling somehow misbegotten, unclaimed, a debuk who'd entered the world under false pretenses and was still searching for a soul to inhabit. His innate existential angst was periodically augmented in his youth by his mother's habit of perching at his bedside and sorrowfully informing him, "Your name is Jonas, but that's not your fault." Naturally, he assumed there was, and so grew as one born guilty. After all, if his name wasn't his fault, then whose was it? He really couldn't blame his mother, Jonas knew, because she wouldn't let him. As he grew older, and she grew more impatient, she tended to respond to his hesitant inquiries as to his true identity with stark reminders that it was, after all, his name, not hers, no matter what it sounded like. Jonas instinctively understood that in his case, the unexamined life was the only one worth living. But having a name that was just a cover for another name, which had itself usurped the rightful place of the real name, left Jonas with a disquieting sense of conflicted loyalties. By day, he lived openly as Jonas, even to the point of strenuously overcorrecting people who addressed him as Jones, after which they usually stopped addressing him. Jonas was his functional persona, the one who more or less directed his self-conscious path through childhood, adolescence, teens, and into young adulthood. But a life spent contending with three possible identities made Jonah feel less like a man and more like an indeterminate principle. He harbored the sneaking suspicion that the confusion generated by his name trifecta, Joshua Jonas, would be ultimately resolved only by a profound, albeit slightly ludicrous, psychological crisis. Perhaps he had a secret identity named Joshua lurking somewhere in the backwaters of his subconscious, a ticking time bomb of repressed self-realization, primed to go off in a psychic explosion whenever the timing proved sufficiently inconvenient. But his closest affinity seemed to lie with his aborted namesake. There are those sublime, powerful, revelatory, and highly irritating moments of sudden self-clarity when he pierced through the veil of life and penetrated to the very core of things, or at least as much to the core as could be plumbed by the occasional dream that rattled his subconscious. Dreams whose nighttime intensity were shattered by the morning's light into half-remembered fragments, but which seemed to allude to a greater whole, a universal truth, the isness of all that is, a higher unity underlying all existence, and which somehow excluded him. These were the times that he was acutely aware that he really was Jonah, crouched in the hold of a storm-struck, God-shaken ship, summoning the courage to go up and tell the world to throw him overboard. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheva. Wow.
Study of value, Sheva.
Our last speaker today will be Helen Rosenow. Helen is the author of The Messy Joys of Being Human. It is a guide to risking change and becoming happier, told through a narrative arc that references Jewish mysticism and practices. The chapter she will read today, Home Base, honors her immigrant lineage. Helen?
Thank you. Am I loud enough?
That's good.
So anybody who's ever had a conversation with me knows I'm not very linear. So what I'm going to do is just invite you to screw Zoom, close your eyes, and let me tell you a bedtime story, because that's how I think of my book, as a series of stories that are best read at night so they can influence your dreams and subconscious. Home base. I appreciate home with or without other folks around. Company's fun, but so is peace and quiet. A friend and I were discussing this recently. She told me about selling her vintage camper, remodeled with splashy good taste. She took the first okay offer because I got tired of having to be nice when people knocked at the door. I'm not suggesting the world's not filled with fascinating folk, and I'm always eager to meet them. I've been delighted to the core by newer friends who've shown up later in life, surprising me with how valuable a place they've claimed in my world and my heart. Later friendships have a depth that shows up more gently, without the fanfare of youth. Lots can be learned kicking back in adjoining chaises, watching cloud pictures in tandem, or sitting by a winter fire with a mug of cocoa or tea. As much sitting as talking, letting your rhythms melt together as you knit your bonds. If you're more of a recluse, you get to winnow the company. Trim the guest lists of those you hang with and those you listen to. Choose only to be with the ones you truly value. One of my favorite quotes is from actress Jean Moreau, interviewed on Fresh Air. I treasure my solitude because I have the freedom to decide with whom to share it. One year at the holidays, I got into a long discussion with a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. We talked about all the reasons people didn't feel safe in the world, at home, even in their own skin. At the same time, I heard a radio story about a security expert. He distinguished between being safe and feeling safe. He pointed out that while we might in fact be safe, if we don't feel safe, we're not. Part of the journey to self-knowing may mean going exactly where you don't feel safe, even where you may feel afraid. For some folks, that might mean skydiving or saying yes to a big challenge you fear you're not ready to tackle. For those who've experienced serious traumas, it can mean braving memories and flashbacks as you try to unpack how they have hurt you. You need to believe you can go there emotionally and come home safe and healed. For serious traumas like sexual abuse, the healing may require trained help. It certainly requires the love and ears of trusted friends or folks who've had similar histories. If you make this part of the journey, the you who you will be stronger than the earlier you, who is herself braver than the you who was afraid to look in that direction, let alone to take the first step. Never discount how serious an undertaking it can be, or how necessary a part of your healing doing this work can be, especially if you do not feel safe. It is only by confronting fear that we shed the layers of armoring and self-protection in which we cocoon ourselves. The layers we are peeling off have served us well and long for a reason. In the past, we needed them. Now we are developing a different form of safety, one that derives from our inner strength, not our outer barriers, be they emotional or physical. At the edge of autumn, long sleeves feel natural in the breeze. Not in the sun, of course, when one can feel prematurely overdressed, but those rare hot moments are a deep inhalation, taking in what's left of what went by so fast, too fast for those in northern climes, though perhaps those in warmer regions long for cooling rains. As we move inside, we see nature through windows. We've braved whatever elements prevail when we're in the world, which feels less welcoming, more of a challenge. In winter, we look at nature more than we're in it. A favorite photograph of my father and his twin brother, aged mid-60s, shows them taking a siesta together in the yard on a chilly November afternoon, both in woolen overcoats, hats, scarves, and 2 blankets each, tucked toes to chin. They've been refugees and immigrants, but they always had each other and a twin-like security most of us lack. I recall sitting with my dad when my mother was dying, talking quietly in the long hours of waiting. I asked him, when you think about your life, what do you see? His answer became my baseline for a peaceful life, whatever the struggles of the moment. I never went hungry. I always slept in a bed. I never had to hold a gun. There's a place to set the bar, if we all had even that. My politics are lefty liberal, so I tend to blame greed and inequity for many social ills. But imagine if everyone, not just folks you know and folks they know, going even a dozen rings out, had a safe place to sleep, wasn't hungry, had good work, was a good citizen, and had leisure time to do whatever they wanted. Can you imagine what the planet would become? I recently heard about the detection of an interstellar sound wave, possibly from a higher order intelligence. The definition had something to do with harnessing the power of a distant sun for space travel. Not a guarantee of future visitors, but enough of a sparkle to be worth thinking about. In a Star Trek episode, we'd be the planet they landed on, not the Enterprise crew. Assumed folks, or not very folks-looking beings, as in the movie Arrival, with brain power 100 or 1,000 times greater than ours. To them, we'd look like tribes of squabbling children, overdue for the timeout corner, or possibly worse. But what if all the things that kept us separated by religions, countries, and socioeconomics were gone? What if we all started with enough? What might we become and learn? The other day, I had a new sofa delivered. The driver, Luis, asked me about a framed picture of Anne Frank I keep on a wall. I told him her story, all new to him. He told me how his parents had come to America and that he would tell his daughter about Anne Frank because she could read the famous diary as a break from her dental studies. I reflected what a wonderful American moment it was. Two children of immigrants sharing their origin stories. I think Buddhists get a lot of stuff right, and a key thought is this: dualism is bad for the soul. In a world of us versus them, blue states and red, bickering nations, races, and religions, the world gets harsh much too quickly and stays there much too angrily. What if we were all part of us, and how the fuck do we get there? In this journey, you have so many choices, like the eternal battle between your Yetzer Hara and your Yetzer Tov. The worse and better aspects. There are lots of pushes and pulls. Your inner light and your unconsciousness run in shifts, deciding where to go based on how safe or needy you feel in any given situation. Each thinks the direction they've chosen is right and that any other option is wrong. When you want the world just for you and the ones you pick, you're starting down a regressive road, not moving forward. We talk about God as oneness, sufficiency, safety, and love. Rabbi David Cooper wisely calls God a verb. We need to make more doorways to peace. My vote is through awe and gratitude. Jews debate whether awe connotes fear or whether it's the vulnerability and openness that comes from recognizing energies far greater than our own. I'm rooting for wonder. Haven't we all had enough fear? Dues paid, move on, enough with the fighting and the otherness, enough with needing to feel bigger because you've made someone else feel small. What if we could transcend winners and losers? What if we didn't look at life like a zero-sum game where you feared my happiness comes at a cost to you? It doesn't, and it never did. I wish you much more happiness and much less fear and anger. But how do we achieve and share this consciousness without needing a common enemy? I think it starts with two old men lying out in the cold, unafraid of the elements and secure in their lives, trusting in the simplest way. No mantra or mudra or special prayer, just taking a nap in the fading autumn sun and assuming they'll wake up safe. Next time you're tempted to speak in frustration or anger, hit the pause button. Instead of fighting, take a nap or a short meditation and let everything settle down. When you rise, you will have replenished your energy. You'll be calmer, steadier, and more grounded, connected in deeper and softer measure to the intangible source that is spirit. As you become more integrated and go out into the world, letting more and more of your true self shine through, you'll respond differently than in your past, both to familiar circumstances and to new ones. I hope you feel safe being you, and that your new skill sets include both curiosity and a willingness to engage with people without needing to armor up. I hope you'll be able to transmute any negative energy that comes toward you, to turn it into light, have it pass through you and not get stuck. Then you'll be able to write your new story and make it happier and safer, to inhale more deeply and share yourself with the folks who need your unique wisdom. Thank you.
Amen.
Really insightful, Helen. Thank you. Beautifully done, beautifully read.
So,
Marvelous.
huge thanks to all of our presenters today for so willingly agreeing to entertain us with their creations. We've recorded this and we'll have it available on YouTube, also embedded on our website, on the TBI website under Sisterhood. If you'd like to explore more of any of these authors' works, I'm sure that you can contact them directly and they'd be delighted to share. I'd also like to invite you to join us on Sunday, January 10th at 2 p.m. for an instructional demonstration of proper pruning practices for our area. Bruce Kreitzberg of Back to the Roots Landscaping will offer a pruning tutorial and then be available for a question and answer session afterwards. Thank you again for tuning in to join us and for supporting your sisterhood. Thank you again to all of our presenters.